It was a Tuesday evening in late September, the domestic scene utterly unremarkable. Thai takeout, the hum of the dishwasher, a documentary droning on. My wife, Rebecca, a financial compliance auditor, was at the kitchen table working on her side consulting business. Everything was the comfortable 4-year routine of marriage. Then she spoke, without looking up. "Hey, so I opened a business credit line using your name." Not nervous, not guilty, just a casual update, like she checked the mail. I stared, putting down my phone. "What?" Her fingers never stopped typing. "I used your information because my credit was maxed out and I needed flexibility. It's not a big deal. I'm making the payments. Your credit score is fine." The cognitive dissonance was staggering. The woman whose career was built on prosecuting fraud had just confessed to committing identity theft against me, her husband, and treated it like a household chore. She was proud of her elegant solution. A heavy, icy pulse started in my chest. I forced my face into the corporate mask of detached neutrality. Never let them see the wheels turning. "Interesting," I replied, my voice dangerously light. Satisfied, she went back to her spreadsheets. She thought the matter was closed. I stood up, the tremor in my hands a mix of cold rage and devastating clarity. I walked to my office, closing the door with a soft, careful click, a sound of finality. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began pulling documents. The fear was gone, replaced by a calculating, cold purpose. She had treated my identity as a resource to be borrowed. Now, I would use her confession to build a case against the very person I had promised to cherish. The world ended quietly around 7:30 p.m. on a routine Tuesday. The smell of green curry and the sound of the deep-sea documentary masked the catastrophe. My wife, Rebecca, a professional compliance officer, sat across the room, focused on her burgeoning freelance spreadsheets. Then came the knife-twist confession, delivered without a hint of shame. "I opened a business credit line using your name." I was paralyzed by the breathtaking audacity. My auditor wife, the expert in preventing fraud, had stolen my legal identity to bypass her maxed-out credit limit. She saw this as a resourceful administrative act. I saw the termination of our marriage's legal and ethical foundation. I kept my composure, years of corporate training kicking in. Maintain a neutral front until the strategy is set. "Interesting," I murmured, watching her smugly return to her work, believing she had secured my complicity with her casual admission. The moment she looked away, I retreated to my office. The door clicked shut, marking the precise boundary between the marriage that was and the cold calculation that began now. I opened my laptop, ignoring the tremor in my hands. The shock had burned away, leaving a clear, icy purpose. She had betrayed every vow and every ethical statute she swore to uphold. The time for emotion was over. The time for a meticulously documented counterstrike was now. I began pulling the necessary files to prosecute the fraud against me. Before we get into it, before we go any further, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hit hype to boost this episode. Drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where viewers are joining from. This story gets darker than you might expect, and there are twists you won't see coming, so stick with me. Now let's get back to it. Let me give you some context about our marriage, because understanding the foundation makes everything else make sense. Understanding where we started helps explain how we ended up here, in this moment, with everything about to come crashing down around us in ways that would change both our lives forever. Rebecca and I had been together for 6 years total, married for 4 of those 6. We met at a friend's rooftop party in the summer of 2017, one of those warm July evenings in Brooklyn where everyone's drinking cheap wine and eating expensive cheese, and pretending to be more sophisticated and successful than they actually are. The kind of party where creative types and corporate types mix uneasily, everyone trying to figure out who's more impressive, who's making more money, who's living the better life. She was standing in the corner near the railing, looking out over the city skyline with a glass of white wine in her hand, and something about her caught my attention immediately. Not that she was obviously beautiful, though she was attractive in this understated way that made her more appealing the longer you looked at her. It was more about her posture, her energy, the way she seemed comfortable being alone in a crowd, self-contained, self-sufficient, not desperately working the room like so many other people at those kinds of parties. I walked over and made some forgettable comment about the view. She laughed and made some equally forgettable response. And then we talked for 3 hours straight, standing in that corner of the rooftop, ignoring everyone else at the party, ignoring the food and the music and the other guests who occasionally tried to join our conversation before realizing we were in our own bubble and drifting away. She told me about her work in financial compliance, about how she'd gotten into it almost by accident after graduating with a degree in accounting from NYU and taking the first job offer that came along, which happened to be at a small investment firm that was later acquired by a larger company. How she'd discovered she was actually good at it, good at finding patterns in data, good at understanding regulations, good at asking the kinds of uncomfortable questions that nobody wants to ask but somebody has to, how she'd worked her way up from junior analyst to senior compliance officer over the course of 6 years. I told her about my own work in project management, about the tech startup I'd been working at that had imploded spectacularly 6 months earlier, when the venture capital funding dried up and everyone was laid off with 2 weeks' notice. About how I was freelancing now, doing consulting work for various companies, trying to figure out what came next in my career. We talked about money and ambition and the strange disconnection between what we thought our lives would look like when we were in college and what they actually looked like now that we were in our late 20s. We moved in together after a year of dating, after months of essentially living together anyway, sleeping at each other's apartments most nights, keeping toothbrushes and changes of clothes at both places. We found a one-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, split the rent down the middle, negotiated who got which closet space and which shelf in the bathroom. It was practical, efficient, adult. We got married another year and a half after that, once we'd both gotten better jobs with more stable income and it started to make sense from a tax and health insurance perspective. We had a small wedding with about 50 people, mostly family and close friends, at a vineyard upstate. It was lovely and simple and exactly what we both wanted. No drama, no excessive spending, no bridezilla moments or family conflicts or arguments about the guest list. We wrote our own vows, kept them short and honest, promised to love and honor and support each other through whatever life threw at us. We meant it at the time. I think we both really meant it. On paper, we looked like a functional, modern couple navigating life in an expensive city with reasonable success. Shared apartment in a decent neighborhood that we couldn't quite afford but managed to swing by being careful with money. Shared bills that we split meticulously. Shared routines that gave our lives structure and predictability. We went to dinners with friends every few weeks, always splitting the check carefully. We took occasional weekend trips to the Catskills or the Hudson Valley, staying at affordable bed and breakfasts, hiking and eating at local restaurants, and taking the obligatory photos for Instagram that made our life look more glamorous and carefree than it actually was. From the outside, we were fine. We were happy. We were making it work in a city that chews up relationships and spits them out. We were one of the success stories, the couples that made it past the 2-year mark and seemed headed for the long haul. But underneath that surface, underneath those carefully maintained appearances, there were boundaries. Careful boundaries that we'd established early on and maintained throughout our relationship with what I'd thought was mutual understanding and respect. We never fully merged our finances, never combined our bank accounts into one joint account like some couples do. She had her checking account and her savings account at Chase. I had mine at Bank of America. We split expenses down the middle using a shared Google spreadsheet that we updated religiously every month, tracking every dollar we spent together with the kind of precision that some people might find excessive, but that we both found comforting. Rent, split 50-50. Utilities, split 50-50. Groceries, split 50-50 more or less, with a running tally of who paid for what. Streaming services, I paid for Netflix and Spotify, she paid for HBO Max and Hulu. Internet and electricity, split down the middle. Dinners out, usually split, though sometimes one of us would treat the other. Everything tracked, everything divided, everything fair, and we kept our individual credit completely separate. Her credit cards were hers, issued in her name with her credit history and her credit score. Mine were mine. We never added each other as authorized users. We never co-signed on anything except the apartment lease. Our credit histories remained distinct, separate, independent. That was the agreement from day one. That was the boundary we'd established when we first started talking seriously about moving in together and building a life as partners. It wasn't because we didn't trust each other, exactly. It was more complicated than that, more nuanced. We'd both come from previous relationships where money had been a constant source of conflict and resentment, where financial disagreements had poisoned otherwise good relationships until they collapsed under the weight of accumulated grievances. She'd dated a guy in college who'd racked up thousands of dollars in credit card debt, buying expensive sneakers and video games and concert tickets, and then expected her to help him pay it off when he couldn't make the minimum payments anymore. She'd felt manipulated, used, taken advantage of. She'd eventually broken up with him and spent the next 2 years rebuilding her credit score from the damage. I'd been engaged briefly in my mid-20s to someone who had wildly different ideas about spending and saving, who thought that living in the moment and experiencing life was more important than boring things like retirement accounts and emergency funds. We'd fought constantly about money, about her impulse purchases, about my need to save, about whether we should take expensive vacations we couldn't really afford. The engagement had eventually collapsed under the weight of those disagreements, and I'd spent months afterward feeling relieved and stupid in equal measure. So when Rebecca and I got serious, when we started talking about building a life together, we decided early on financial independence, clear lines, separate accounts, no surprises, no hidden debts, no unilateral decisions about major financial commitments, everything discussed openly and honestly, everything transparent, everything equal and fair. It was supposed to protect us. It was supposed to prevent the kind of money conflicts that had destroyed our previous relationships. It was supposed to be the foundation of trust that would let us build something stable and lasting. Or so I thought. Rebecca worked in compliance at a mid-sized financial services firm called Meridian Financial Group. It was one of those companies that manages investment portfolios for wealthy individuals and small institutional clients. Hedge funds, family offices, pension funds. The kind of firm where one mistake, one regulatory violation, one hint of impropriety could trigger investigations by the SEC, FINRA, and half a dozen other alphabet soup regulatory agencies that could destroy the company overnight. Her entire job, her entire career, really, was built on identifying regulatory risks before they became problems. Monitoring employee conduct for potential ethical violations, investigating cases of suspected fraud or misconduct, making absolutely certain that nobody in the organization crossed any of the countless ethical and legal lines that govern the financial services industry. She sat through mandatory annual training sessions on fraud prevention and identity theft. She signed off on quarterly policy updates about unauthorized account access and data security. She reviewed case files where employees had been terminated, sued, and sometimes criminally prosecuted for violations that range from insider trading to expense report fraud to unauthorized disclosure of client information. She participated in investigations. She interviewed suspects. She wrote reports recommending termination, though she understood, intimately and in exhaustive detail, exactly what constituted fraud under federal and state law. She could cite the relevant statutes from memory. She knew, better than almost anyone I'd ever met in my entire life, exactly what lines not to cross, exactly what actions constituted crimes, exactly what the consequences were for crossing those lines. And she crossed one anyway, deliberately, carefully, methodically, using my identity as the vehicle for her crime. The irony wasn't lost on me. The irony that the woman whose job was preventing fraud had committed fraud herself. That the woman who investigated identity theft had committed identity theft herself. That the woman who sat in judgment of others' ethical violations had committed her own ethical violation and had done so against the person she was supposed to love and protect most in the world. She'd been doing freelance consulting on the side for about 18 months, maybe closer to 2 years by the time she made her confession. It had started small. Nothing major at first, just helping a friend's small business with their bookkeeping and annual tax preparation. A few hours here and there on evenings and weekends, just to make some extra money and stay sharp with her skills. Then word of mouth had spread the way it does in small business circles. Someone knew someone who needed help with payroll processing. Someone else needed help implementing better financial controls. Someone needed tax planning advice. Gradually, almost without her intending it, she'd built up a little roster of clients. 7 or 8 by the time she confessed, maybe more. Small businesses mostly. A boutique clothing store in Williamsburg, a marketing consulting firm run by 2 women who were great at creative work but terrible at finance. A small architecture office that needed help managing their project accounting. A coffee roasting company that was growing faster than its founders could handle administratively. That sort of thing. Nothing glamorous, but solid, legitimate work that paid reasonably well. She was legitimately good at it, too. She had the skills, the knowledge, the professional demeanor. She understood accounting and finance and tax law. She was organized and thorough and detail-oriented. Her clients loved her. They recommended her to other people. She was building a legitimate reputation, and it brought in decent extra cash on top of her regular salary, probably an additional $30,000 to $40,000 a year on top of her base salary at Meridian, which was around $85,000. Between her job and her freelance work, she was making around $125,000 a year. Combined with my project management income of around $90,000, we were pulling in over $200,000 a year as a household. Comfortable by any standard, especially for people without kids. I supported her freelance work completely. I thought it was great that she was building something on her own, using her expertise and skills to create an independent income stream that could eventually, maybe, turn into something bigger. Maybe she'd leave Meridian eventually and do consulting full-time. Maybe she'd build an actual firm with employees and a real office instead of working from our kitchen table. I encouraged her. I asked about her clients with genuine interest. I celebrated when she landed new contracts. I was proud of her entrepreneurial drive. But apparently, building something on her own required my name, my credit, my social security number, my identity, my legal standing. She didn't ask me, she didn't mention it in passing, didn't bring it up as a hypothetical possibility that we could discuss like adults who respect each other's autonomy and rights. She didn't seek permission or approval or even just a heads up. She just did it. She just took what she wanted from me, my identity, my credit, my legal liability, and used it for her own purposes without a second thought. She assumed that because we were married, because we'd said those vows 4 years ago in front of our families, my identity was hers to borrow, like a sweater from my closet, like my car when hers was in the shop, like a tool from a shared toolbox. Like it didn't matter because we were a unit, a team, a single entity in the eyes of the law and society and God or whatever. That assumption, that casual, thoughtless, arrogant assumption, told me everything I needed to know about how she actually saw our relationship, about how she saw boundaries, about how she saw me. She didn't see me as a separate person with rights and autonomy and legal protections and boundaries that deserved respect. She saw me as an extension of herself, as a resource to be accessed when convenient, as a tool to be used when her own tools proved insufficient for the task at hand. And that realization, sitting there in my office that Tuesday evening with my laptop open and my hands still shaking slightly and my heart pounding in my chest, changed everything. Changed how I saw her. Changed how I saw our marriage. Changed what I was willing to accept and what I was willing to do. It changed me. I didn't confront her that night. Didn't march back out to the kitchen and demand answers or launch into accusations or start an argument that would have gone nowhere productive. I needed time to think first, to process what I just learned, to understand the full scope and implications. More importantly, I needed information. Hard facts, documentation, evidence. Because accusations without evidence are just noise. They're emotional outbursts that can be dismissed or deflected or turned back against you with counter-accusations and hurt feelings and claims that you're being paranoid or controlling or unreasonable. But accusations backed up by ironclad documentation? Those are weapons. Those are leverage. Those are power. So I spent that evening in my office, quietly researching identity theft laws, understanding what exactly she'd done and what the potential consequences were for both of us. Understanding my legal position, my rights, my options. By the time I went to bed around midnight, sleeping in the same bed as her, maintaining the illusion that everything was normal, I had a plan forming. The next morning, over coffee at the kitchen table while she was getting ready for work, I asked her to explain it to me in detail, to walk me through exactly what she'd done and how and why. I kept my tone curious rather than accusatory, interested rather than angry. I wanted her to believe we were just having a conversation, just clarifying some administrative details about her business operations, nothing more serious than that. "Walk me through what you did," I said, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug and looking at her with what I hoped was an expression of genuine curiosity and maybe mild concern. "I just want to understand how this works, the mechanics of it, the business side." She seemed relieved that I wasn't angry, that I hadn't spent the entire night stewing about her confession and building up resentment and anger. She probably thought I was coming around, that I was interested in her business, that maybe I'd even be proud of her resourcefulness and entrepreneurial creativity, that maybe I'd see this as a sign of her business acumen rather than what it actually was. She had absolutely no idea she was digging her own grave with every word she said. "Okay, so," she started, setting down her own coffee mug and leaning forward slightly with the enthusiasm of someone explaining a clever solution to a complex problem. "About 4 months ago, maybe closer to 5 months actually, it might have been late April or early May, I needed a business credit line to smooth out cash flow issues. You know how some of my clients pay on net 30 or net 60 terms, right? Which means I have to cover all the expenses for my business for weeks or even months before I actually get paid. Software subscriptions for QuickBooks and Excel and all the analytics tools I use. Contractor payments when I need to outsource work to other freelancers because I'm overbooked. Marketing costs for the website and Google Ads and networking events, office supplies, professional development courses to keep my certifications current, subscriptions to financial databases. All of that adds up really fast, like $3,000 or $4,000 a month in overhead." She was warming to her topic now, getting animated the way she always did when talking about her business. And my personal credit was already pretty much maxed out from the car loan and some old student debt that I'm still paying down, plus that medical bill from last year when I had to go to the emergency room for that allergic reaction. Remember? So my debt-to-income ratio was too high for me to qualify for a business line of credit on my own. I applied at 3 different banks and got rejected by all of them because the algorithms flagged my existing debt load as too risky. So you used mine, I said neutrally, not making it a question, just stating a fact. Right, exactly. I used your information, your social security number, your income documentation from your W-2s that we use for our joint tax return, your credit score, which is like 780 or something, way better than my 640. I figured it wouldn't be a problem because I'm making all the payments on time. Every single payment, never missed one, never even been late. You're not affected at all in any negative way. Your credit score hasn't changed. I've been checking it regularly to make sure. There's been no negative impact on you whatsoever. If anything, it's probably helping your credit because it's adding another account with perfect payment history, which the scoring algorithms like. I nodded slowly, processing the information, calculating in my head how many federal laws she'd just admitted to breaking in that single paragraph. Identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1028. Wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Paragraph 1343. Possibly others I'd need to research. And you didn't think to ask me first? To run it by me before you submitted the application? She hesitated then, and I watched something flicker across her face. It was subtle, a slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible shift in her expression. But I'd been with her long enough to recognize it. It was calculation. She was deciding how much honesty was safe, how much truth I could handle without freaking out, what version of events would be most likely to secure my cooperation and forgiveness and complicity. Then she shrugged, and the mask of casual confidence slid back into place seamlessly. Honestly, I didn't think you'd mind. I mean, we're married. We're a team. We're partners in life. What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine. That's literally what we said in our wedding vows, remember? The whole in prosperity and adversity, in joy and sorrow part. This is just the prosperity part, right? I'm building something that benefits both of us, ultimately. I was going to tell you eventually, obviously, but I wanted to make sure everything was running smoothly first and that the business model was working before I bothered you with administrative details. She reached across the table and touched my hand, that intimate gesture that had once meant something. You're so busy with work right now, with that big hospital system project that's been consuming all your time and energy for the past 3 months. You come home exhausted every night. I didn't want to add more stress to your plate with financial details that don't really affect you in any practical way. I was trying to be considerate, actually. Trying to handle it myself without burdening you. There it was. The justification, the reframing, the careful linguistic construction that transformed identity theft and fraud into thoughtful consideration for my well-being. That turned a crime into an act of spousal kindness. She didn't see it as fraud. She didn't see it as identity theft. She didn't see it as a violation of my rights or my trust or my legal autonomy. She saw it as a shortcut, a practical solution to a business problem. A creative workaround to an obstacle that was preventing her company from growing. And because we were married, because she believed in some version of merged identity that existed only in her mind and had no basis in actual law or ethics or respect for individual autonomy, she felt entitled to take that shortcut without my consent, without my knowledge, without my participation in the decision. She thought marriage meant permission. She thought the vows we'd exchanged gave her carte blanche to use my identity however she saw fit, whenever it was convenient for her purposes. I asked her more questions, keeping my tone carefully neutral and curious, like a journalist conducting an interview rather than a prosecutor building a case. Which specific lender did you use? How much was the credit line approved for? When exactly did you open it? What date? What documents did you have to submit? How did you forge my signature on the authorization forms? Did you use DocuSign or physical paperwork? What address did you list on the application? Did you have to provide income verification, and if so, where did you get those documents? She answered everything freely, even enthusiastically, clearly relieved that I seemed interested rather than angry. She even pulled up the account on her laptop to show me the dashboard, scrolling through the payment history and current balance with the pride of someone showing off a successful project. The credit line was for $50,000, which was substantially more than I'd expected. She'd drawn down about $18,000 so far, using it for exactly what she'd described: business expenses, contractor payments, software subscriptions. The interest rate was 8.9%, which was apparently quite good for a small business line of credit. The monthly payments were around $400, and her payment history showed green check marks for every single month. She hadn't been lying about that part, at least. Everything was current, just like she'd said. She thought honesty, after the fact, would earn her forgiveness. She thought that by being transparent now, by showing me that she'd been responsible with the account and had made every payment on time and hadn't caused any negative consequences for me, she could undo the violation. She could make it okay retroactively. She could transform a crime into a minor administrative oversight that we could laugh about someday. I took screenshots of everything on my phone while she was showing me the account, being casual about it so she wouldn't realize what I was doing. I made detailed notes in a new document in my phone's Notes app. Dates, amounts, lender name, it was called Velocity Capital Partners, a name I'd never heard before, account numbers, routing numbers, payment history. She watched me do it, probably thinking I was just being thorough and responsible, maybe even impressed by her business acumen and organizational skills. She had absolutely no idea that I was building a criminal case against her, no idea that every word she spoke, every document she showed me, every detail she provided was another nail in the coffin of her career and possibly her freedom. I saved everything carefully. I backed it up to my secure cloud storage. I created a password-protected folder on my laptop with copies of all the screenshots and all my notes, encrypted with a password she'd never guess. I organized everything chronologically, adding timestamps and context to each piece of evidence. I was methodical, thorough, professional. I was preparing for war, and she thought we were having a friendly conversation. I didn't yell at her after she finished explaining. I didn't threaten divorce or call her a criminal or launch into a lecture about ethics and legal boundaries and the difference between partnership and property theft. I didn't show any of the anger or betrayal or hurt that was building inside me like pressure in a closed system. I just asked for more clarification, for complete documentation, for every piece of paper she had related to this account. Can you forward me all the paperwork? I said that evening, while we were sitting on the couch watching some mindless sitcom that neither of us was really paying attention to. The original application, the approval emails, the monthly statements, the payment confirmations, everything related to the account from start to finish. She looked surprised, pausing the show and turning to look at me with raised eyebrows. Why do you need all that? I mean, I showed you the account dashboard. You can see it's all current. Because it's my name on the account, I said reasonably, keeping my voice calm and practical and just slightly concerned in the way that would make my request seem perfectly natural. Even if you're making all the payments, even if everything's current, it's still my legal responsibility ultimately. If something goes wrong down the line, if you miss a payment for any reason, or if there's a dispute with the lender, or if you default, or the business fails and you can't make the payments anymore, it's my credit that's on the line, right? It's my legal liability. Creditors will come after me. It will show up on my credit report as a default or late payment. It could affect my ability to get a mortgage or a car loan in the future. I leaned forward, selling it, making sure she understood my reasoning was purely practical. I need to have complete records of everything so I can track it properly in my own financial records. Just for my own peace of mind and protection, this is my financial future we're talking about. I need to be able to monitor it independently, not just trust that you're handling it. Nothing personal. It's just good financial practice. She nodded slowly, and I could see the relief flooding through her body language. This made sense to her. This was reasonable. This was exactly the kind of thorough, responsible, slightly paranoid thing that was consistent with my personality, with how I'd always approached financial matters with caution and careful documentation. Yeah, that's totally fair, she said, touching my arm affectionately. That's actually really smart. I should have thought of that myself and just sent you everything from the beginning. I'll forward you everything tonight after dinner, okay? The whole file. And she did. True to her word, around 9 o'clock that evening, while we were both in bed reading, her with some mystery thriller she'd been working through, me with a collection of essays about corporate culture that I was pretending to read while my mind raced through scenarios and possibilities, I heard the notification chime on my phone, email from Rebecca, subject line, credit line docs, full file. I opened it, my heart rate accelerating slightly despite my efforts to stay calm and appear casual. She'd forwarded me everything, absolutely everything. The original application with my information filled in, my name, my social security number, my date of birth, my employment information, my annual income. The authorization forms with my forged digital signature, a reasonable approximation of my actual signature, but not perfect if you knew what to look for. The approval letter from Velocity Capital Partners congratulating me on being approved for the credit line. The account opening documents with all the terms and conditions. Every single monthly statement since the account had been opened in May. Every payment confirmation showing the transfers from her business checking account. The automatic payment setup documentation. It was all there. A perfect, comprehensive, meticulously organized paper trail of fraud. She'd handed it to me gift-wrapped with a bow on top, thinking she was being helpful and transparent and rebuilding trust between us. I downloaded everything to my secure folder immediately. I backed it up to 3 different cloud services. The next morning, while she was in the shower getting ready for work, I printed physical copies of the key documents on our home printer, the application with my forged information, the authorization forms with my forged signature, the first and most recent account statements. I organized them chronologically in a 3-ring binder, using those clear plastic sheet protectors to keep everything pristine. I labeled each section with dates and document types written in neat block letters. I created a detailed summary document outlining the timeline, when she'd opened the account, when she'd first accessed it, every transaction, every payment, every communication. I noted discrepancies where I could find them. I highlighted the forged signature. I documented everything that proved beyond any doubt that I had never authorized any of this, had never even known about it until she confessed. I prepared it exactly the way I would prepare documentation for a legal proceeding, with the kind of thoroughness that leaves no room for doubt or alternative interpretations, with the kind of attention to detail that prosecutors and judges and juries find compelling. Because that's exactly what this was going to become. A legal proceeding, a case, an investigation that would end with consequences I was only beginning to fully understand. Here's what I want to be absolutely clear about, because this is important and people often misunderstand my motivations. I didn't do this out of spite. I didn't do it to get revenge for some perceived betrayal. I didn't do it because I was angry or because I wanted to punish her for hurting my feelings or violating my trust. I didn't do it because I took some sick pleasure in watching her career implode. I did it because what she did was illegal, and I had no legal, moral, or ethical obligation to protect her from the consequences of her own deliberate choices. Let me explain the law here, because it matters and because people need to understand what we're actually talking about. What Rebecca did, opening a credit account using another person's identity without their knowledge or consent, is identity theft under federal law. Specifically, it's a violation of 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1028, which criminalizes identity fraud and identity theft. The law is very clear on this point. It doesn't matter that we were married. Marriage doesn't create an exception. It doesn't matter that she was making the payments on time and my credit score wasn't negatively affected. None of that matters under the statute. What matters, the only thing that matters legally, is consent. Did I knowingly and voluntarily consent to her using my identity to open this account? No, I didn't. Therefore, it's identity theft. Full stop. End of legal analysis. The fact that she worked in compliance made it worse, not better. She knew the law. She knew it intimately. She'd personally participated in investigations at Meridian where employees were terminated and prosecuted for violations that were arguably less egregious than what she'd done. She'd sat in meetings where the company's legal team had explained, in excruciating detail, exactly what constituted fraud and identity theft and unauthorized access to personal information. She knew, and she chose to break those rules anyway, deliberately and with full knowledge of what she was doing, using my identity as the vehicle for her crime. That wasn't just a betrayal of marital trust. That wasn't just a relationship problem that could be solved through couples counseling or a difficult conversation or a heartfelt apology. It was a crime. A federal crime actually punishable by fines and prison time. And I was the victim. So I did what any victim should do when they discover they've been the target of a crime. I reported it to the appropriate authorities. But here's where my strategy becomes important, where the calculation comes in. I didn't just file a police report or contact the FBI's Financial Crimes Division or notify the credit bureaus or hire a lawyer to send a demand letter. Those were all options, certainly, and I considered them carefully while weighing the costs and benefits of each approach. But I did something more strategic, something that would have immediate and devastating consequences for Rebecca in ways that criminal charges would take months or years to achieve, if they ever materialized at all, given how overloaded the federal justice system is with fraud cases. I reported it directly to her employer's compliance department. Think about that for a moment. Really think about the implications. Rebecca worked in compliance at a financial services company. Her entire job, her entire professional identity, was built on investigating and preventing exactly the kind of fraud she herself had committed. If I reported her crime to her own compliance department, to the very people she worked with every day, they would have to investigate her with the same rigor and thoroughness they would apply to any employee accused of fraud. They couldn't sweep it under the rug or give her preferential treatment or quietly suggest she fix the problem without facing consequences, because doing so would potentially expose the company to massive regulatory liability. And more importantly, more devastatingly, if their investigation confirmed the fraud, which it would because I had all the documentation and the evidence was ironclad, they would have to terminate her, immediately, for cause, with a notation in her permanent employment record. Because keeping an employee who'd been proven to have committed fraud, especially an employee in the compliance department who was supposed to be preventing exactly this kind of misconduct, would be an unconscionable risk for a regulated financial institution. They'd have no choice. Policy would demand it. Regulations would demand it. Their own legal liability would demand it. I spent 2 days crafting the perfect email. I wrote probably 15 different drafts, refining the language, adjusting the tone, making sure every word conveyed exactly what I needed it to convey. Professional but concerned, factual but not emotional, serious but not hysterical. The kind of email that gets taken seriously immediately. The recipient was Richard Chen, Chief Compliance Officer at Meridian Financial Group. I'd actually met him once at a company holiday party about 2 years earlier. Rebecca had brought me as her +1, and we'd ended up in a conversation about risk management and regulatory frameworks that had been surprisingly interesting. He was a meticulous, careful man in his mid-50s who'd spent 15 years working for the Securities and Exchange Commission before moving to the private sector. I knew from things Rebecca had mentioned over the years that he took his job extremely seriously, that he had zero tolerance for ethical violations, that he'd personally recommended termination for employees who'd done far less than what Rebecca had done. I knew he would take this seriously. I knew he would investigate thoroughly. I knew he would follow procedure exactly, without favor or bias. The email I finally sent was clinical and precise. 3 sentences, no more. I am writing to report a potential compliance violation involving one of your employees. The attached documents show a business credit account opened using my personal information without my knowledge or consent. The account was opened by Rebecca Torres, employee ID MT4782, who works in your compliance department. No accusations of fraud explicitly stated. No demands for action. No expressions of anger or hurt. Just facts, just information, just a concerned citizen bringing a potential violation to the attention of the appropriate authority. I attached the complete document set that Rebecca had so helpfully provided me. The application with my forged information, the authorization forms with my forged signature, the account statements, the email correspondence where she'd openly admitted what she'd done, explaining it as a business necessity. My own written statement explaining that I had never authorized any of this, had never even known about it until her confession, and was only learning the full scope now. I included my contact information and offered to provide any additional information or documentation that might be helpful for their investigation. I read the final version 7 times, checking every word, every comma, every implication. Making absolutely certain the tone was perfect, professional, concerned, factual, unassailable. Making certain there was no hint of personal vendetta or marital conflict, nothing that could be used to dismiss this as a domestic dispute rather than what it actually was, a clear-cut case of identity theft and fraud committed by a compliance officer against her own husband. Then I scheduled it to send at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning. I wanted it to arrive first thing in the morning, before Richard started his day, before his inbox filled up with other urgent matters. I wanted it sitting there at the very top, impossible to ignore, demanding immediate attention. Then I closed my laptop, took a long shower, and went to bed. I slept deeply that night, better than I had in weeks. There was something clarifying about having made the decision, about having set events in motion that I couldn't take back even if I wanted to. A sense of having done what needed to be done, consequences be damned. After sending the email to Richard Chen, my wife's head of compliance, at 6 a.m. Thursday, I said nothing. I maintained the perfect, meticulous facade of the devoted husband for 3 full days. Same coffee, same routines, same affection. I was an actor playing a character unaware that his wife was walking toward a catastrophic cliff edge. Rebecca, oblivious, believed the crisis was averted. She was energized, excitedly planning a massive new $30,000 consulting contract that would legitimize her side business. I congratulated her, knowing with cold certainty that this future would never arrive. My initial discomfort and residual guilt vanished when I recalled her casual justification. I didn't think you'd mind. She saw me not as a partner with rights, but as a resource to be accessed. The hammer fell Monday afternoon. I was in a routine meeting when her text started. Something weird is happening at work. They called me into a meeting with Richard and HR. I'm freaking out. Please call me. I didn't. I maintained my usual schedule, arriving home at 6:30 p.m. I found her in the bedroom, pale, disheveled, and on the phone with her father, a retired corporate attorney. She hung up, her voice a desperate whisper. They put me on paid administrative leave, she managed, tears streaming. They escorted me out with security. They asked about a credit account. Someone filed a formal complaint alleging I opened it without authorization. Was it you? Did you report me to Richard? I walked to the bathroom, washed my hands with deliberate slowness, and returned, meeting her eyes with perfect, terrifying calm. "Yes," I said. Her face twisted into disbelief. "Why would you destroy me like this? Over something that didn't even hurt you? We're married. We're supposed to be a team." "Because you committed fraud," I stated, completely devoid of emotion. "You used my identity without my permission. That's identity theft. I reported it to the appropriate authorities in your organization." "You knew I could lose my job. This was calculated." "Yes, I knew," I confirmed. "Just as you, a compliance expert, knew the consequences of committing a federal crime. What happens now is the natural consequence of your choices, not mine. Marriage doesn't give you a license to commit crimes against your spouse." "I thought you loved me," she sobbed. "I did," I replied, deliberately using the past tense. "But love doesn't mean I surrender my legal rights. Love doesn't shield you from the consequences of your deliberate actions." She stood there, broken and destroyed. I felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty. I had chosen protection and justice over complicity in a crime committed by the person who had fundamentally violated my trust. For 3 days, I played the devoted husband, maintaining a meticulous routine after secretly emailing my wife's head of compliance at 6 a.m. Thursday. She, excited about a huge $30,000 consulting contract, remained blissfully unaware that I had detonated her entire career. Monday afternoon, the Façade cracked. Her frantic text demanding a call went ignored. I arrived home at my usual time to find her already there, shattered. She'd been escorted out of her office by security, put on paid administrative leave, and faced with an internal investigation. "They asked about a fraudulent credit account," she whispered, tears streaming. "Was it you? Did you report me?" I performed my routine, washing my hands, hanging my coat, then met her gaze with chilling composure. "Yes," I confirmed. "Why would you ruin me? Over a debt I was paying off. We're married. We're supposed to protect each other," she shouted, hysterical. "You committed identity fraud," I replied, the truth brutal and cold. "You, a compliance expert, knowingly broke the law using my name. Marriage is not a license to commit crimes against your spouse." "I thought you loved me." "I did," I said, past tense. "But love doesn't mean complicity. What happens next is the consequence of your informed decisions, not mine." She dissolved into sobs. Her world collapsed by the fallout of her own casual betrayal. I felt only the stark, cold clarity of self-protection.